I gotta be honest, part of me is kind of like Randy Newman. I do love LA. We are at the Hustler at his vlog 253. Now, this appearance in Los Angeles is not for poker. Making an international voyage out of LA, which you'll see more of if you feel like sticking around. But for right now, the Hustler is the casino that I have not played in Los Angeles. I've been at the Bike, been at the Gardens, the Commerce, have not yet played here. So, let's see how it goes. While Vegas is the gambling capital of the world, the poker equivalent of such is Los Angeles, California. And as I'm sure you guys who watch a channel like this all know, anyone else from the other 49 states who doesn't play poker seriously will always be stunned to find that out. Anyway, California poker is interesting. They charge the most rake, don't give you comps, and severely restrict the amount you can buy in for. And yet, despite all that, they still have the most action, and oftentimes, maybe not as much anymore, they have the best games. I'd show up at Hustler Casino at 1 p.m. on a Wednesday, and for the second consecutive non-Reno vlog, I'd be given permission to shoot video. So that was cool. Sadly, it was the second straight week in which I'd booked a win on the session I'd vlogged, but gotten destroyed in the ones I didn't. So I was hoping to get a spark on this trip. My plan was to play 5, 300 to 1,000. If I lived nearby, I'd certainly be playing higher, but since I'm only in town for a day, and I don't like the idea of getting destroyed and not being able to take another crack at it the next day, I figured 5-5 was the way to go. But as I waited to get in that game, and I was first on the list, I jumped in a 2-5, 500 max game. I wasn't even planning on vlogging any hands in this game, but there came one in which I simply would over-limp King 10 of spades from the low jack. And in typical LA fashion, we play a 7-way pot. And with $30 in, I would proceed to pretty much hit a flop as hard as one possibly can. I bet right out with this, and two guys make the call. The button raises to 75, and it folds back to the guy on my right who cold calls that bet. So I'm looking to keep both of these guys in there, and I 3-bet this flop to 180. The button doesn't waste any time, and he snap calls. And then the guy in MP, and this is the kind of thing that once you get into the higher stakes you never see, but in a game like this, it will happen. He says out loud, well, I have to call here. And with 620 in, the turn card comes the 7 of hearts, which is obviously a beautiful card for me. Now, I only have a little over a half pot size bet left, so I think it's pretty obvious. I bet it all. The button, again, snap calls me. And the other guy, who clearly didn't love his hand on the flop, still pretty clearly didn't love it here. Turns out that card, on its surface, gave him what he thought was a little more equity, even though it didn't. He calls as well. So we have $1,500 in the pot. I currently have the best hand one can have, but it was pretty clear that I was going to have to dodge something. I never felt that I was up against a set in this spot. I figured I would have gotten a all-in raise on the flop from either of these two guys if that's what they had, and sure enough, my read was right. The button shows Queen Jack for 2 pair, and middle position shows Ace 7 of spades for a pair and the nut flush draw. So I need to avoid all the spades but the queen, as well as the other queens and jacks that exist in this deck, and if I can do that, I will triple up right out of the gate here in Los Angeles, so you know what to do. Go ahead and jam that like button. It's been proven scientifically that it helps in spots like this, so hit the button and let's go to the river and see if I can triple up right out of the gate, and sure enough, I managed to do it. What a ridiculous start. In a game that I wasn't actually even planning on playing in, I managed to flop the world and have it hold up right out of the gate in Los Angeles. So that was an unbelievable start to the session. I probably didn't make the guys in that game too happy, because as I was stacking the chips, that's when I got called for the 5-5 game. So it was basically Thanks for the money, boys, and I'll see you later because I'm going to the other game scenario. Not something that happens to me too often, but it happened to me here. So that was the way this game got rolling, as I would make the trip about 20 feet to the other side of the Hustler Poker Room and grab a seat in a 5-5 game with a $1,000 cap buy-in. Of course, I'd be in there for more than that after having won that pot in the other game. So I'd grab the 2-seat, and that was actually a cross from a content creator that I wasn't familiar with named Sammy Breakfast Poker. But he was certainly a very good player and a nice guy. I actually almost donated to him early on. I called a raise with ace-10 of hearts and got a 10-6-6 flop that no one bet. And thankfully for me, a king hit the turn, because I definitely would have lost some money to Sammy, who had flopped 10s full and ended up getting paid off by someone else who couldn't get away from a king in that spot. It was unclear how good the game was actually going to be. It did feature, for those who like this sort of thing, PLO double board bomb pots at every dealer change. I'd actually stay hot early on. Overly so, in fact, as I'd end up making 4s full of kings, but clearly wasn't up against anything when I did. And that takes us to this hand when we get a raise from the under the gun +1 position, and I would just call the 20 with ace-jack of diamonds from the hijack, kind of wanting to feel out the table a little more before 3-betting a hand like this. Cutoff calls, and the big blind does so as well. And with 80 in, we see a flop that comes out ace-10 deuce, all clubs. Original raiser checks it to me here, and I bet out for 35. Cutoff and big blind fold, but the original raiser in the +1 spot makes the call. So the 140 in. The turn is another 10. He checks again, and I bet 50. He then proceeds to go into the tank on this spot. I do believe that he was actually considering all 3 options here, but I also had to believe that he was close to drawing dead, as he mucks the hand after a lot more thought than I would have imagined he would give it in a spot where he actually had something. The next hand would come when I also get dealt ace-jack. This time I would 3-bet it, but that raise would result in a fold. I'd lose back a little of my winnings in a pair of failed set mining operations before this hand would ultimately take place. I'd open 20 under the gun with ace-king of clubs and would get 3 callers. And with 75 in, the board would be an interesting one. King, queen 5, 2 clubs. I just bet 30 here, hoping to incrementally build this pot up. The player on my left in the under the gun 1 spot then proceeds to raise to 100 with the other 2 guys folding. Now this player has been very patient on the day, so it was certainly possible that if I were to 3-bet and he were to jam his remaining 800 in, the only way I'd be able to win the pot would be by hitting a non-board pairing club. But despite that, I raise anyway, making it 230. He gives this a lot of thought before choosing what I thought would be the last option he would, and that was simply folding the hand right now. This is a mid-session update. Everyone here at Hustler's been very good. I love the way they embrace vlogs. Obviously the live stream has been a huge hit, but I do have 2 words for this casino. Phone chargers. The lack of phone chargers definitely made getting hands shot challenging on this day for me, but not more so than being card dead for hours on end following that hand that I won with the ace-king. I played a few of the PLO double board bomb pots, but I also sat several of them out, and over the course of that time, a lot of the available time I had on the day got sucked up in just waiting for these PLO double board bomb pots to transpire because they take a long time to play, which is why I am not a huge fan of them. But that takes us to this hand. I am under the gun with queens, and I raise to 20 and 5-5. The small blind 3-bets me to 60, and then it gets interesting. The short-stacked big blind, who clearly was not a shark, to put it mildly. 4-bet jams all in for $175 here. So, what is my play here with queens? After giving it some thought, I'd finally opt to re-raise the side pot to $350. The small blind thinks about it for a minute before calling the $290 more. And with 525 in the main and 175 in the side, I was hoping to flop a full house in this spot, and sure enough, I did. The flop is all sevens, and the small blind checks. I ask how much he has left. He says $415. So I say, all right, that's the bet. He then proceeds to take like 10 seconds or so to call me here, creating a $1,000 side pot. The guy on my right, who was already all in for the main, shows that he has pocket kings here. So, given the fact that the guy on my right shows kings, and this other guy just took 10 seconds to call a $415 all-in with that much money already in the pot, what are the chances that queens are no good here? I feel like they're basically always good under those specific circumstances, and yet that is not the case, as this guy shows the other two kings. For a massive slow roll / nit roll, there is no universe that he's ever folding kings in that spot. I'm not sure exactly what the hell that was about, but it was obviously a brutal spot for me. It came about 5 hours into the session. I had played extremely few hands on the day. Obviously, my profit pretty much all came in one hand, and unfortunately, all went away in another hand. I would have about 2 hours left before needing to Uber to LAX, and I think I set a record for most times getting dealt specifically the hands 8-4 offsuit and 10 deuce offsuit over that stretch of time. It's not a record you want to set, but a record nonetheless. We'd get a few limps and I'd pick up jacks in the small blind and make it 8x. And as I expected, I'd get multiple callers. So the 140 in, the board would come out queen 9-10 2 spades, which is certainly interesting. I bet out for 55 here, and my only caller is the guy who limped under the gun. And with 250 in, the turn is another 9. I was torn between betting and checking here. I figured a small bet was not the worst play. It would allow me to continue to get value from his draw, and I'd lose less if he has a queen here. So I bet 70, and he calls pretty quickly. And with 390 in, the river is the deuce of spades. So now my only decision is whether or not to turn my hand into a bluff here. And I do wish I had, as I just check, and he instantly checks back and wins with ace-queen. So in a 3-hour stretch, I had not won a single pot. I'd play for about 1 more hour before needing to catch that Uber, and would rack up and book an extremely disappointing loss. All right, so after being up about 1,000 at one point during this session, I managed to lose back all of that profit, plus a little bit more, $163 loss. I played about 10 more hands after that hand with the queens against the kings. And this is, I guess, not a shock, but I did not win or have the best hand by the river in a single one of them. Though I did have the second best hand in, I think, about 6 or 7 of them. So I got that going for me. This trip is not actually about poker. The good news is I now have a week to not play any poker at all, and that's coming at a good time. I'm making my first ever trip over to Asia. And you know what? I'm just gonna go there right now. I feel like if I just think real hard, I can get there instantaneously. Damn! That was easier than I thought.
Don't wanna sleep in, cause I got something to prove. I gotta take what I hate and finally.
You know what's funny? When I was around 25 or so, I always dreamed of making trips like this. But of course, back then, I couldn't afford to do so. And now that I can, I encounter the issue of not wanting to be away all that long because, well, I miss my son. Though, seeing these two siblings interact did put a smile on my face in the meantime. The trip to Japan with my girlfriend Anna would begin in Tokyo. Shibuya, to be more specific. If you've never been, there are a few things that struck me that anyone who has traveled there already knows. One was just how efficient everything is. 40 million people in the metro area, and yet I never saw a single traffic jam when I was there. Now, I didn't ride in any cars, but I took a lot of trains, and it was on the subway where the city really earned my respect. People don't hassle each other. They keep to themselves. They move quickly and with a purpose. Basically the way I always try to do it. As for the 3-night stay in Tokyo, it included trips to Tokyo Tower for some cool views of the city, a stop by the gardens of the Imperial Palace, and even a bus ride out to check out the views of Mount Fuji. By the way, on that excursion, I did run into a viewer of the vlog, and I also drank the water that came off the mountain, which apparently is as pure as is available anywhere. Straight out of Fuji. Kyoto was the second stop of the trip, more of an old Japan feel. Not a place where it's uncommon to find people in traditional kimonos walking around, including this person. After this trip, I have decided that I am of the opinion that the bow is a superior greeting to the handshake. And even the deer in Nara Park agree with me. And one last note, I am not a foodie by any stretch, but the food in both these cities was absolutely unbelievable. And it's also cheap. If you're looking to lose weight, this may not be the best trip for you. But if you're like me and got 20,000 steps a day in, maybe it's not the worst thing. Also, if you're looking for a good place to get pics for Instagram, as Anna and I did, Japan is about as good as you can possibly get. And usually it seems that when you give your phone to someone and ask them to take a pic, they don't do too well. But the guy that took this picture, I think, did absolutely amazing, and I couldn't be more happy with the way that one turned out. Anyway, overall, a great trip, highly recommend it, and for me, it came at the perfect time to take a week off of poker. If you're new to the channel, hit those like and subscribe buttons, and we'll see you back in the US next time.